The source did not place us here to be one thing. We get to choose what we are and who we are. We get to decide what our self-definition is. And so it can be almost anything. Beyond certain material conditions that we are born into or born with, and even those descriptions of sex, race, or color, all of these are very amalgamized descriptions. They're not any one thing, even though they feel like they are. And they're fairly flexible as far as perspective goes. We were not put here to be overwhelmed by what this world wishes to force upon us and how we define ourselves. And all the challenges that are thrown our way, all the hardships, all the pain, we expand with every sensation, every experience, every reaction, and every recalibration. We expand as an individual and who we are. We need not be so afraid of taking risks, of trying things that we fear we may fail in. Even if we fail, the boundaries of who we are pushed a little bit further. We may feel more constrained and confined with how many things we realize we're not good at or we have trouble doing. But in reality, we're just seeing where the borders were, and light is being cast upon those borders, and we're seeing where those borders are. That doesn't mean they can't be pushed. Just because we're not good at something right now doesn't mean with trying again and again that we won't be good at it in the future, or we won't become more, and we won't understand we will understand ourselves more and more and figure out exactly where those boundaries are that we can push. Whether it's trying to develop some kind of skill, whether it's trying to understand ourselves on a psychological level, or whether it's growing spiritually, or growing in society, friend groups, or love interests. With all of these efforts, our borders expand. And the way we define ourselves through language, think about it. The language that we're speaking, it wasn't developed by wise men and women, by people looking to describe the more subjective experiences we have as human beings and the subjective world, the inner world. Language wasn't built to do that. Language grew organically. Many languages. Sanskrit was engineered, but every other language that I know about was not engineered. I'm sure there's other ones that were, but most language is not engineered. And it certainly wasn't created to accommodate individual diversity or predispositions or individual choice in how we think about ourselves and who we are. Language is a system of convenient associations with things that exist in the exterior world, and only in a very loose and vague way has language evolved to describe the inner world or connect the exterior to the interior of our being. Language evolved to accommodate trade, to accommodate ease of use, and some of the most prolific languages now, though they might be the result of empires conquering many peoples or spreading their influence, the languages that those empires speak, like English. English is a very, very obtuse tool, non-specific. It's like a hatchet compared to a scalpel. And it's fairly easy to learn, but it's an amalgamation of Italian, German, Saxon, Anglo, Scandinavian, and French. I think 30% of the English language is directly drawn from French. It's an amalgamation, and it is a language of convenience, and it was not planned out. If wise men and women created a language, they would probably put their wisdom into it. They would probably put their internal understanding after many years and much wisdom into creating a language that was better for generations that are younger and generations to come. But we don't have anything like that. We have this obtuse tool that we call, and I'm using English as an example, but you can copy and paste most other languages. Some languages are better at describing things like love, something that's more ephemeral, more familiar, more internal. I would say probably French and Italian is probably better at describing love and different kinds of love. Eskimos have over 100, at least over 100. It's probably more like 300 words for snow, because think of all the different kinds of snow that they deal with. Their world is filled with snow. So all the different kinds of snow, they would all need descriptive terms, which Eskimo language has, because that is their world. Human beings, when they were using most languages, it was a system of trying to put together something that everybody could understand and everybody could use in the external world, rather than something that they could use for their internal world or describe their being. I think Sanskrit has so many different words for God. Ishvara, Ishvari, Brahman, and Atman being a part of Brahman. All these different terms and ideas about God, and then its purpose is that, and to correlate with how vocalization manifests in the material universe. It's a remarkable language. I don't know nearly enough of it. But my point is that the internal landscape that we witness every day and that we deal with every day, we intrude that landscape with language. And a lot of the time, language can hold us back in describing ourselves and communicating with other people how we feel and what those feelings are connected to, what emotions those feelings are connected to, and how we feel about those feelings. We're using external words that were amalgamated together out of convenience to try to orientate our own understanding of ourselves within. And that can be incredibly harmful, because since, for instance, English is an external language and was made out of external convenience of objects in the external world, and this thing is that, that thing is that, and their relationship, to try to internalize language and use it to understand ourselves makes our understanding of ourselves very obtuse, very vague, and it gets in our way, I would say, more than it helps a lot of the time. Now, if you don't know any language and you grew up raised by wolves or something, there's plenty of stories that I've read about, children, it's not prevalent, but, raised by wolves in essence. And they're all very sad stories, because those people were almost never able to re-enter society. If you're raised by wolves to the age of 6 or 10, it was almost impossible for you to redefine your associations and become what we view as a functioning human being. And I don't think that we're looking at the story correctly if we're thinking that these people can't speak or they have trouble speaking, so that means that being able to speak and having language is more useful, more important. I think we have to look at those stories and realize that those people were not able to shove themselves into the box that our entire lives we're trying to shove ourselves into by even how we understand ourselves internally. Books on psychology and psychiatrists and psychiatry, Freud, Jung, for instance, a lot of their statements are very deep and cutting and beautiful and revealing. But they kind of are that way because of their vagueness. You have to write a whole lot of words and speak many words in order to get across the same psychological understanding. That's why great psychiatrists, great psychologists were able to write in a way that floated through those passageways of difficulty, or just write a whole bunch to get across their points. That's why it requires so many words to explain how we feel sometimes, how specifically that we feel, or to communicate a story to somebody about our past and how devastating or how great it was for us. Because we don't have those individual words to describe all of these wonderful, unique, and terrible experiences of what it is to be human. These are edges, perceived edges of our being. And the first step is to illuminate those boundaries of what we think we're good at, what we're not good at, how we understand ourselves, our trauma, our emotions, illuminating those boundaries. But then the next step after that is realizing that while the light is there, those boundaries that we see are an illusion. They aren't really there. They're only useful in the sense that we eventually overcome them. Maybe in a way where we actually get better at a skill, or we realize that, hey, that definition I had for myself, it didn't actually exist at all. It was an illusion. It's one of the reasons why I like the Upanishads so much, and their perspective on how this world, how material existence, how this universe is Maya. It's an illusion, because if you really dig deep down into the borders and all these borders that we think exist within ourselves and how we understand ourselves, they're not actually there. And if we really look deeply at matter, an atom, if we look close enough at it and get down to, the electrons and then the quarks, we start to realize matter isn't really there either. There's holes all through it, and electrons blink in and out of existence. Matter itself isn't really there. So the Upanishadic seers, they intuited and probably saw in a completely different way, but in a more illumined way, that, hey, this place doesn't really exist. And also who we think we are doesn't really exist. The edges of the bubble that we are as an individual can be popped because it's so thin, it's Maya, it's not really there. And then we become everything. And I've only had one experience. Well, I've had many experiences where I feel at one with everything. But I wouldn't say that I've had any more than one experience where I literally just became everything. For not even that long, but time just didn't exist there. Didn't exist in that way. And I've told this story before, but I was walking out of Walmart and I was about to step off the curb, and then it was like I was gone. But it wasn't like I was gone because I wasn't there. It was because I became everything all at once. And when that bubble is popped and that air inside that bubble expands, it's not so much that that air that was inside that bubble doesn't exist. It's just that your perspective grows so much bigger, or that air becomes connected to everything in such a bigger way, a vaster way, that it's hard to see that individual pocket of air, one, because it's mixed, and two, because you can see and feel everything all at once now. And that's such a small piece of, those are small area of molecules, very similar to how our soul is. But going back to my description of that story, it's the more time goes by since that happened to me, the more I can kind of put it into words. I think that's why I keep telling it again and again, and because I keep on trying to figure it out myself. Because at the time, it wasn't right after it happened, it wasn't confusing, because I gained the knowledge that the reason it happened was because the Divine Mother wanted to show me that this was a big step in my life. Receiving this certain murti, this certain statue of the Divine Mother from India. It was my, I started my ability to do puja, to really connect to God in a form, so I connect to the formlessness better. But it was such a big step the Divine Mother just popped me for a minute, and I was everything. And there's kind of two images that are stuck in my head that don't really make any sense yet. One is that while I was everything, I was also viewing everything in an exterior fashion, but there was no outside, yet I was looking at it from outside, if that makes any sense. And it's almost like I was the face of the Divine Mother. And then I saw the entire cosmos, but most of the cosmos didn't really make any sense, because usually we think of space as black, but most of the space was filled with different kinds of energy. And I later realized or at the time I knew, but then later on things became muddled and I wasn't really sure. But now I realized that I was seeing the astral universes along with the material universes, where space is black, but in the astral universes, it's all different colors. So I was seeing the vastness of that space, and it made up the face of the Divine Mother in forms of stars, galaxies, and couldn't really see planets, only like big lights like nebula, but most of it was like color, which didn't make any sense because I was still thinking of space. But now I realized it was astral planes, all made up her face, but it made almost like a human-like face, smiling, and I was that face, and I was everything, and I could feel all of it, all the universes, all at once, and I was that. Yet I was viewing it from the outside, but there was no outside. See, it doesn't really make any sense. It made perfect sense right after the time. I didn't, when my bubble was depopped and I became Hunter again and was put back in the bubble of individuality, of my soul was, I suppose, re-encapsulated or re-Maya'd. Maya was spun around that piece of me again to make Hunter. It made sense right after because I still had that insight, but later on I was struggling to remember and realize, because there's all these things in the way. There's all these things in the way of us experiencing our soul. And the boundaries are Maya. We have to, Maya illusion. We have to expand our self-definition. And we have to expand our internal vocabulary and our personal vocabulary for ourselves. Even if that means making sentences longer in how we describe ourselves internally, if we only speak one language, or learning some esoteric words or concepts like from the Upanishads. We have to expand our internal vocabulary, our spiritual vocabulary, our emotional vocabulary, and our self-defining vocabulary, so that eventually that vocabulary we can liberate ourselves from it. First expansion, and then liberation. That's how the bubble pops. Expands first, unless the Divine Mother or God, whatever you want to call it, source, unless pops it like it did for me, because I didn't do that to myself, it just happened to me. Unless there's that little bit of grace, and I wasn't permanently popped. It'd been nice if I was permanently popped, but unless there's that divine grace where your bubble is popped, the bubble has to expand before it bursts. So we have to expand our understanding. Learning about the material world, learning about how things work scientifically, mechanically, electrically, vibrationally. Learning the material sciences is a good thing. Learning more stories, learning about psychology, philosophy, good things. Even if it's just to describe this material world, expansion of that kind is required most of the time to get other kinds of expansion that are deeper. They lead to greater expansions. And eventually they're meant to be surmounted. But I think it's in the Upanishads, the gist, the vibe of it is that somebody who starts to expand their understanding of material sciences and languages, vocabulary, psychology, philosophy, even if it's not even spiritual at all, eventually you reach a point where you start getting so much in your brain, there's so many connections being made, you start to see the vastness makes you dispassionate. Now, dispassionate doesn't have to be not compassionate, but you start to be very dispassionate. Have you noticed when you listen to a scientist or a philosopher, most of the time they're very dispassionate, or they don't seem like they're emotionally flamboyant or expressing themselves in dramatic ways or really getting excited. Some scientists do. But because once you expand the intellect about the material nature of this world, you start to become detached from it, which is good. There's ways detachment can go bad, but ultimately detachment is good. Dispassion is good, and detachment is good. Because once there's so much for you, it's like, how can you get attached to every little thing? What I'm getting at is that the edges of ourself are an illusion. We have to push those edges, those boundaries, before we truly realize they're an illusion. Because I can sit here and say that this world is Maya to you all day, but if my stomach gets hungry, I'm gonna go get something to eat. I won't say, oh, this world's an illusion, my hunger is an illusion, food is an illusion, I'm gonna go eat. Or if I'm cut off in traffic in a really rude way, I don't get as angry as I used to get. But I'll get a little frustrated, and I'll start speaking in aggressive language, even internally and sometimes vocally, in a way that I don't usually speak. Not nearly as bad as I used to, but because when you're still caught up in the world, it feels real. And as long as it feels real, enlightenment is still not there. There are steps between us and enlightenment. It can't happen spontaneously. Moksha can happen, liberation can happen spontaneously. But that's not the rule. That's usually the exception. Divine grace can happen spontaneously. It's usually not the rule, but the exception. Usually there's a process. And in order for the biggest truths to become realer than this reality, there are phases. And I can talk about Vedanta all day to you. Well, maybe I couldn't, because my understanding isn't that great. But I can talk about Vedanta all day to you in oneness. But there needs to be things that make it real. And that's realization. When those greater realities, those deeper truths become your reality. And it seems spontaneous when somebody becomes enlightened. But it took a whole lot of work. And it takes us a whole lot of work. First step, redefining ourselves. At any rate, I hope you found this interesting. This has been a video about self-definition and how we should push those boundaries of self-definition. And we'll see exactly how I word that in the title. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful. I hope at the very least you just like to hear me talk, because I know some of you do. Like this video if you liked it at all. Let me know in the comment section if you watched till the end, or if you just have any other comment. It helps out the channel when I get comments, and feel free to share this wherever you like. At any rate, Jai Ma, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day.